listeners, and welcome to A Geek Tragedy. I am Stephen, known online as Plague Mantle for various reasons, and I am your host. And I'd like to welcome to the pod, as ever I do, the most erudite human and my best friend, Holly.
Thanks. Now I know where your loyalties truly lie.
True that. Holly properly. Hey, Holly, how are you and how is Mr. Sully? Welcome back from lands afar.
Thank you. I am very well, thank you. I'm still quite tired. I only got back into my house today, so Sully will not leave me alone at the moment. I think he might have missed me just a tiny tad.
Did you come back with the thing you're holding?
With my squishmallow? No, I found it in Sainsbury's. I obviously paid for it, but I went to Sainsbury's and I saw it on a shelf, and then I had to bring it home because it's a little mushroom.
Holly is holding, for our listeners, a provocative one-eyed marshmallow with a heavy cap.
It's a mushroom.
Dubious.
Don't. Poor...
And that noise you can hear in the background is Mark, of course, our very own salvage man. Craft practice, Mr. Caudry. How are you? How are you, Mark? You well?
I'm very well. Happy making noise in the corner here. I like to call it speech, but you call it whatever you want.
Well, we're not here to about speech today, are we? It's not here to about noise making either, generally speaking. But there we are. You're looking a lot less red than usual.
Yeah, I'm playing around with my lighting setting in the studio here, which I euphemistically call the studio, which is actually my spare bedroom. Yes, so I do look less like I'm about to explode or just pop.
Excellent.
Which I like.
And hidden behind the scenes, our producer and long-suffering Kit. And I don't know, are we starting again with new things that can be Kit? Kit Kat.
Kit Kat.
Kit and Mix, I don't know.
Kit and Mix. I love it. That's particularly brilliant. Yeah, that makes me really happy.
We're going to go the other way around and put Kit at the start.
Okay,
yeah, we can play around with Kit's pseudonyms.
Okay.
Can we play around with yours, Stephen? I presume I should have actually phrased that somewhat differently because it's a little weird there. Can we play around with yours, Stephen?
This is why I'm condemned by the Space Pope or the Pope.
Yeah. I'm just freewheeling here. So how are you anyway?
Yeah, I am bizarrely okay. I have been awake more or less without going to bed for about 2 days, and I don't know how I'm still functional, but I'm great apparently right now. So that's good. Look, I'm good.
I think that's called delirium.
Well, apparently when I get on the pod, I'm all good. When I see it, I think it's just a long period of time sat in the office on my own working, and then I get to see you guys. It's kind of like
there you go, us. We're so rejuvenating, aren't we?
Yeah,
we're refreshing.
A lovely, adorable company.
Especially that squishy marshmallow thing. It's kind of
it's still. It's a wrong un.
It's a mushroom.
It's a wrong un mushroom.
Okay, on to mushrooms. I am very sad to announce that Margaret is over.
Do you mean Halloween? Spooky
it's not
season.
For me.
October.
Halloween is not open.
When everyone listens to this, it's going to be the end of Margaret. So it was the best of times. It was a pearl of a time, but it is now done.
It's the spookiest of times.
It was.
I'll have 2 Halloween parties this year by the time this comes out, which is great. 2 excuses to dress up.
So why don't you get some footage of you, and then we can throw it into the additional footage area.
Okay, I shall get one from our caves adventure at the weekend just gone. We did Party Underground. Bill
and I doing trick and treating. But excellent. So, and it's moving into November, which we decided it is a traditional month that geeks talk about comic books.
I thought you were going to give it a name.
Well, as it happens,
for
my own safety, not to name this month.
Good. I thought you were going to say it's coming up to Joan.
Mostly because I was trying to think of an alliteration, but got bored.
Convember.
No, you got to have November and then another word beginning with N that works for comics, but I couldn't think of one in the 3 or 4 seconds I bothered to give it thought, and then I gave up. If you think of something, that's grand. Anyway, we're going to spend the next few weeks diving into what we love about comics, how they inspired us, anecdotes about them, what they mean to us, where they've taken us. And we're going to kind of do that by focusing on the history of comics and kind of walking our way through them, because I know that at the beginning, for example, Holly's going to love talking about why comics exist and kind of that sort of thing. And then I'm sure you and I can talk about like early comics and bits and pieces, and all three of us can pitch in with just everything really. Before we start, like right now, if you had to name them, the one your favorite comic, I know what Mark's answer is going to be. What's your favorite comic, Mark? What's the one you're looking forward to popping up in the pod?
Well, it's always Fantastic Four will
Yeah.
be a steadfast favourite of mine.
Looking forward to the film, huh?
Oh yes, finally in the MCU. Please God, do it right this time.
Well, later we'll talk about. I imagine the MCU at length at one of the episodes at some point. But I'm just watching the Agatha one.
Oh, Agatha All Along.
Yeah, Agatha All Along. It's a lot of singing.
I'm really excited. I haven't watched it yet. But I need to watch WandaVision again first. But I'm really excited for Agatha All Along because it's like it's apparently it's just fantastic, and I'm very excited.
I'm very enjoying it. A lot of singing. It's interesting. But Holly, about you? You're talking away there. What's your comic of choice? What's your what you're waiting to talk about?
Jesse Custer's Secret Jesus.
Preacher.
It's always Preacher.
Love
Did
it.
you see the series?
I did. I loved it.
Yeah, it was really good, wasn't it?
Absolutely loved it. Yeah.
Interesting.
That and Legion as well. The TV series of Legion.
Never
Haven't
saw
seen it.
Legion. No.
Highly recommended.
Okay.
I think there's 3 seasons of it, but that is excellent.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice. Obviously, I'm looking forward to the Star Wars Lego magazine.
we get every month.
Yeah, because the Lego is cool. I was thinking about. I asked this question because I was thinking about it myself today. Because I'm looking over there at my like extensive comic book collection, which is up against the wall. And I'd like to say something like Sandman or The Crow, but Sandman's a bit of a dicey topic at the moment. But the Crow I really enjoyed when it came out. And it made a big impact in my life.
But you've also got all of those comics just above your head.
Yeah, well, those were a charity shop find. That's like what is it, 80 odd hardback DC comics for like 60 quid out of a charity shop. So
yeah, because they're the ones that you could get in like you got them on subscription.
Yeah.
They're kind of the subscription ones.
Yeah, I kind of bought them when I went into Oxfam one day, and I thought, you know what?
I'm having those.
You know what? I'm going to get my car.
I'll be right back.
They were still there when I got back. Okay, cool. So I'm looking. I think Crow. I'm going to say The Crow because I really enjoyed that. That was a big thing. I mean, there's a lot of other bits and pieces, but that was a big impact in my life. So yeah, let's kind of kick off into the exciting stories of. I'm having real trouble, so I must be lack of sleep. When we started to draw comics the way we do, and how that defined their future. So I wanted to talk a little bit to start off with, and I wanted to hear, how Holly would describe the reason that we kind of created like the cartoon strips and such in the first place, in the way that they impact now. I mean, I know there's a lot of other comics that came out in like the 1800s and stuff, which were like about people mining and throwing rocks at each other or whatever. And there was like jungle pulp and that kind of stuff that kind of appeared. And I think you would have always had things like Buck Rogers and stuff. But, in the late 1800s, there was a huge immigration into America of folk from all around the world. None of them spoke, I suppose the Americans say, none of them spoke American.
They'd say that now. I think at the time they probably would have said English. Potentially. Who knows? But no, obviously art in totality is quite divisive because, you might love Turner and I might hate Turner. I might love Dali and you might hate Dali. But there is something inherently universal about art. It's a really easy way to communicate things to people that don't all speak the same language or don't all have the same cultural worldview or lens. So if you need to, it's why there are so many pictorial, is it
cave paintings?
Well, yeah, cave paintings. Obviously, the first comic strips.
Well, I mean, I was going to say about probably my favourite first comic strip was Feather, Eye, Bird, Man Walking Sideways, which came out in Egypt. And was a real classic.
You reminded me of a LARP anecdote where we had a character who was playing. It was very Egyptian. He just wore the whole pharaoh kit, because you can when you're LARPing. And I specifically had an NPC run through like the woods towards him. Like they do in Monty Python when Sir Lancelot Squire runs to him. It was like that. Ran and ran and ran. Eventually got there, and he's out of breath. And he went, "What is it? What is it you want, man?" And he went, bird standing on one leg, an eye, some reeds, 3 wavy lines.
Man going like this.
Yeah, man going like this. It was great. Yeah, I love that bit.
But no,
But yeah,
that's
right.
it's an incredible way of universal storytelling. Basically,
Yeah.
is you can add language and nuance to it, but it's
And money making,
and absolutely money
because
making. But
it was Pulitzer and Hertz were the ones that kind of went like, how can we sell our newspapers
to
to this
more
giant
people,
audience of immigrants? So there's hundreds of thousands. They're all going into New York and Chicago, and they're going into big cities, and they want to sell their newspapers. So they started drawing pictures, and they were like, kind of, we're going to make comic strips. And they were, I was saying to you earlier, the Hogan's Alley and the Yellow Kid were like this big strip about this strange figure poking fun at the police, and impoverished scamps, the immigrants and the imps were the heroes, and the police were the bad guys. It was all about sensationalism and focusing on issues of class and race that were really prevalent at the time. And Hearst and Pulitzer picked out, and they had that big sort of like yellow journalism war, which is fantastic, and that kind of permeates through comics from that point onwards. Really, I think
it absolutely does. I think there's a lot that, again, sort of like comics and illustration. You have to. I mean, and I know that we're probably going to talk about this in much more detail as we kind of move through like various like historical periods of time in various kind of civil rights movements and things. But you have to be reading a comic book is very similar to like watching sort of like a documentary, or reading or an anthropological text in a way, because you have to be aware of the cultural lens that the writer is looking through.
Mm-hmm.
So things can be greatly exaggerated pictorially to suit whatever agenda it is that the person that is creating that comic might want to show you. And they can also, obviously, like, things will absolutely hugely change with the times as well, when
you've got some terrible exciting stories about those later on, haven't we?
I've got some exciting stories about Asterix for sure.
Good old Asterix. And Tintin?
Never really read much Tintin, to be honest. I was always an Asterix girl. I wasn't really that massive fan of Biggles either. Biggles was a comic, right? As well as being a...
Yeah, they did. I've got one somewhere.
I thought so.
Anyway, carry on. You had a plan.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I don't mind how far outside the kind of journey we go. Because I mean, the whole idea of outsiderism, which is kind of like what we're talking about, kind of the ethnic minorities writing at the time, that kind of carries on for decades and decades and decades. And what we see reflected in comics, when I was reading comics when I was growing up, it was the 80s, so it was a bit crap. But they've just gone through the whole revolutionary period in the 70s, where they were trying to reassert themselves after the awful comic book code sort of like stuff happened, right? But it was just happening again. The whole kind of idea of people with anti-war sentiment that had just happened, and the whole sort of like 1970s feminism. But obviously that was done in a very 1970s way. In any medium you watch from that period of time, it was all very 19. It was 1970s, but if you go back and watch it, you're kind of like, oh god. Oh god, they could have done this so much, but cringe. But when you look back then, it wasn't so cringy, was it? It was really hard hitting. A lot of the stuff happened back then. It was less kind of less straight after the comic book code happened. Yeah,
that's kind of exactly the point, right? Like, comic books are incredible because, well, comics in general, whether they're kind of like comic strips from newspapers, or whether they're kind of full on stories, you can see the progression of like what the sociocultural norms are basically day by day with comic books. You can see the phasing out of like certain kind of illustrative styles that might not be too good. Appropriate is a fantastic word. You can see those being like phased out over time, and then you can see like other things kind of creeping in, and like because they're very like, if especially if you're looking at like comic strips in newspapers and stuff. I'm not talking about like Fred Bassett and but like sort of the actual like
Andy Cap,
but like the actual kind of like proper satirical comic strips.
Didn't we recently talk about Hagar the Horrible?
And we did recently talk about Hagar the Horrible, and his dog, whose name was Snert. But you can see, like you can basically watch the zeitgeist change
Yeah.
And it's incredible. You don't get that really anywhere else day by day. You get it with movies. You can see a cultural shift in movies over time. You can see a cultural shift in, like books and music over time. But with comics, you can see it, how it changes daily. And that's
So
really cool.
what was the Fantastic Four doing when you first picked them up, Mark?
I think that literally the first Fantastic Four that I ever read was the first episode, the first publication. It was a reprint because Marvel did a whole thing of reprinting classic Marvel stories, which were generally Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk, and occasionally you'd get the Avengers, and occasionally you'd get Iron Man on his own. But those all came in as reprints into the UK, probably I guess in the early 70s, maybe. I haven't checked. But that's kind of the era that I remember them from. So I literally, I think when those arrived on the shelf, they really caught my eye because they were not the Beano and they were not the Dandy and they were not they're not all of these. They seemed more exciting, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I probably had dabbled in a few EC comics from the local corner shop newsagents. But yeah, I remember very, very well
What were they doing?
seeing what?
They were in space, weren't they? They were off into space to get their strange powers.
Oh yeah, this is rather than the Ultimates version. This was them going off into space and getting hit by the cosmic radiation. And
So that was November 1961, according to this internet.
it was indeed. I'm virtually the same age as the Fantastic Four.
Do you think that's why you like them so much?
Well, we're the same age.
Cosmic connection.
Wait, hang on, Mark. Does that mean that we're in your birthday month?
If in November, yes.
Excellent.
And you can work out from that reference how old I'm going to be this year.
I meant to say earlier, by the way.
Ixnay.
It's
How does it feel?
At least 84.
And the horse you rode in on.
It's a classic response.
It's one of my favourites. I heard the best insult today.
Mm-hmm.
The best, and it's very quick, so it won't take up too much of my time. But so someone I heard, I didn't hear it. I read it because it was online, and it was someone saying, "You're the reason the gene pool needs a lifeguard." It just really made me giggle. Yeah. Sorry.
I need to get together little insults like that because Burnt is Clean, the LARP group, is doing another pirate event, and part of their system, their combat system, involves insults.
Oh, very, very Curse of Monkey Island.
Very much, yeah. That's exactly what they based it on.
Love it. You've told us the story when we were doing the LARP podcast. Anyway,
yeah. So this is comics.
Yeah, we're talking about ethnic minorities in writing, aren't we? So I think we're probably pointing towards the fact there was a huge amount of Jewish writers and creators around that time. Because we're going to come to those in a minute when we talk about kind of development and stuff. Particularly because a lot of the characters that I really love from both Marvel and DC were kind of based in those. They were written there because it was crap. It was a crap medium, apparently, according to Will Eisner. He said it was a crap medium that Jews would find it easy to work in. Everyone was regarded as trash, so nobody wanted to write there. So they went in and wrote, and they had their 2,000 years of history of storytelling, and they just kind of went for it. And that's kind of why it happened. But there you go. So let's look at early doors comics for us.
This is not something I know an awful lot about, so I'm really excited to kind of.
Unless
it's like
the creation of Jewish writers.
Well, there's that. That's not sort of something that I actually know anything about really. So I'm really excited to learn about that. But early doors comics. Well, yeah, of course, there's Stanley.
He wasn't a practicing Jew. But the whole kind of his whole belief structure was kind of it's there. You can see the whole kind of concept there. But you have more so with the DC creators, yeah. I
just find the history interesting. It's yeah. but also like like early doors comic books in general. It's not something that I've ever. Unless it's the Beano and the Dandy. Like,
I mean, you go back to like say Punch and stuff like that as well. But
I do have some old Punch. No, I've got old Punch.
I know we have old Punch. I think is what we're supposed to say.
Yeah. Okay. Good point.
Old
books tend to travel.
So, like stuff that I really loved when I was a kid, and Mark and I have just touched on it in the past, right? Which came out of the 1920s, which don't really kind of fit into like the Marvel DC stuff and bits and pieces, but have lost no importance whatsoever. Things like Buck Rogers, and like I said earlier, like the jungle kind of pulps and that kind of thing. There were loads of comics about like people going off and doing safaris and whatever, which was I guess okay. But well, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, it's a bit weird, but you have to kind of like take into account that like not a lot of people are actually going to these places and like photographing things and bringing them back. Like if you want to show someone what a lion looks like, you've got to draw a lion. Like, and
in
then
the same way that like kind of medieval guys drew cats.
No, not like that, because nothing is as strange as a medieval person drawing a cat
or
a horse
or an elephant.
Basically anything, to be honest. Like the style of it's. I mean, like yeah, very
Okay,
very
so, like,
strange.
I've talked about the Shadow, right? In the very second pod that we did, I talked about the Shadow at length, right? Remember that? I talked about the Shadow being the radio stuff. But like in the 1930s, 1920s, and leading into the 1930s, there was a whole lot of like kind of stuff about Flash Gordon. And do you remember Mandrake?
Mandrake the Magician.
Yeah. So him, Flash Gordon, and the Phantom, who are quite early superheroes, or like at least cartoon strip heroes. The Phantom is the guy that's like, I have the strength of 10 tigers, and then in the cartoons, just like a load of tigers' faces would flash in front of him, and he would somehow take them in like cocaine.
Eyes of an elephant. No, that's something completely different. Isn't it?
That's Brave Star, isn't it?
No, that's the Banana Split show.
What? I have the ears of an elephant. I can't stand up. My head is so heavy now.
No, size.
All right, size. I thought you said ears. Oh, weird power.
Which would have been weird. I mean, that would have been utterly bizarre if I'd said that.
I'm a bit cooler in the warm weather. I can't lift my head off the floor.
Oops, strong breeze.
Anyway, so the Phantom, who snorted tigers or whatever, Mandrake the Magician, who was a guy in a top hat and a cloak. He was the stereotypical kind of like magician with the top hat, cane, and the black cloak.
Yeah.
And Flash Gordon, of course, who went off and saved the universe. And many years later, in the 1980s and 90s, they would come together in a cartoon called Defenders of the Earth.
Defenders of the Earth.
Defenders, and that would be.
That's well. Yeah. We didn't even rehearse it.
So confused.
And who else was in that? Because there was some other. Because their kids were in it for some reason.
No, I don't know. I actually only really. I think I've seen some stills from it, but for some bizarre reason, I know the theme music for it.
It's because it's catchy. Catchy theme tune.
No, it's the Defenders.
Yeah,
that's.
Anyway, so these things survived as well. I mean, this is what we talked about with the Shadow, which I really liked about him because he was a character that survived the years in different formats. I went from being Orson Welles to being someone crap. But that's just it is. But but these guys existed, so they kind of came around and they kind of floated on, and there was a lot of work by Philip Wiley's, I think his name was. And another thing that I found really interesting when I was kind of like a kid about this time period was that most of the people that wrote comics also invented shit. But mainly, I was leaning towards the fact that, like, the Wonder Woman story, which I want to go into in a bit because
you love that story so much.
Listeners, Stephen has been talking about this for fucking weeks.
It is really cool.
He invented
spankingly good.
He invented a lie detector.
Like polygraph machine.
Yeah.
Like the actual.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was a psychologist.
All right. So he invented so he's basically the reason that Jeremy Kyle was successful.
Yeah, that was his entire plan.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah. It was it's like you had these kind of like, and these were all pulp comics, right? And they turned into those whole pulp TV serials that we loved when we were growing up.
I love the Green Hornet, and obviously the Flash Gordon was probably the most well
The Rock,
known from that era because he was serialised in shorts at the cinema for your matinees.
you had Buck Rogers, didn't you? And the Flash Gordon, right? The two big, played by Buster Crabbe and whoever else it was. And Taskmaster,
Buster
who comes out of the Jungle Pulp from that time as well. Obviously, it was written about beforehand, but that all kind of happened. And I love the fact that turned into pulp TV serials. I love that's what they did with it. We got pulp comics, which turned into pulp TV shows, and they'll eventually become pulp films. And the word pulp I love the word pulp. It's a very edible kind of word from writing.
It's glorious.
That came out in the 1920s and the early 1930s has survived this long, and we all sort of enjoy rubbing ourselves in pulp material.
I don't think that bit's true.
I like saying stuff though.
I know you do. Pulp backwards is plup, and that's an even better word.
Thanks, listeners. This is nonsense.
Do you know what your name is backwards?
Iloch. It's very Chthonian.
Oh, smart. Mine's Cramley Rodrock.
My name is Nefetz.
Thought that might amuse you.
Oh, it's been a really, really, really long fortnight.
Hasn't it?
So we still watch these things. That was going to come kind of be my point. And I love the fact that genre is carried on, and that again, but we don't really kind of get into the whole. That's kind of a stepping stone that existed between when the whole newspaper writing thing was happening, and then you kind of get to the whole. The people I was going to talk to you about, Holly, that when you were saying that it's fascinating, I don't know much about this time. Before I get into Wonder Woman, who I really want to talk about. So much. But it's good. It's good. I like it. I can't.
It was
help myself.
oddly bovine, Mark. That noise.
Did you make a yummy sound?
Well, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were like two Jewish immigrants, both born around the same time, and they created Superman, who is considered to be like the whole birth of the golden era of superheroes.
Didn't Batman exist before Superman?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
The most boring superhero came along.
Oh, he's
first.
so dull.
Oh,
Gladiator came along.
God, he's so dull.
Gladiator?
Yeah, Gladiator came along first. Gladiator was the first dude. Gladiator was a guy called something Danner. I can't remember his real name. The character's name rather.
Okay.
But he kind of turns up as a book that was written in
a book. Is that his superpower?
Here's Bookman.
I am a book.
Oh, that would be
Leaf through me.
That would so be me if I was
Bookman?
a superhero.
Should you be Book then, wouldn't you?
Be book hero.
Book Beans?
Book beans. Book beans.
Or just
No.
Just
Book
books.
beans.
Just books. Book beans.
I'm sure that no one knows what we're talking about, which is grand.
This has gone way off on a tangent.
Okay, so Gladiator. Man.
Long story short, it's a book about a guy called Hugo Danner, who was I've only flicked through this book, but he was basically a genetically engineered super guy, and he had the ability to outrun trains and faster than a speeding bullet, and he could jump over tall buildings.
Did he have a giant cotton bud for a weapon?
No.
Did he go on the first whistle or the second whistle?
They added that later in the film that was released as a serial called Gladiators.
On Saturday night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he produced that. He wasn't actually in it. But he had this whole look on superheroism of being like, I don't want to do it. I don't think I'm worthy of doing it. And he goes up against like presidents and all manner of things, and everyone hates him because he's got superpowers. Like he stops the bank being robbed, or like, he frees someone who's trapped in the bank vault, and then everyone tries to kill him because they think because he can get in the bank, they think he's going to rob all the banks in the world. So they like go after him. And in the end, he goes into the outdoors in the storm, and is like, God, why has this happened to him? He gets electrocuted and dies in a lightning storm. But my point being that like this dude is basically Superman, and the guy also wrote books about like the Earth being destroyed, and a bunch of people have to build a rocket and flee it. It's basically the Superman story in 2 books. But the point is that he's not heroic. He's kind of more of a I could help people, but I don't know what to do with myself. And you're right, Superman is quite dull. Yeah,
he's so dull.
He's very kind of like all American. But he isn't when he starts off, though, is he?
Is he not? I have
No,
to. I
he's-
have to
He
admit
does some
that.
car lifting and
No.
stopping
I
crooks.
just-
When Superman starts off, like one of my again when I was at school, we like when Superman died, in the 90s.
Oh,
My
yeah.
friend, because obviously we're nerds and we get beaten up at school. He wore his black Superman armband that he got in the comic when Superman died, and it didn't go well for him. But he wore it. I tried to wear it for several days because I can't go. But I would say to him, like, Superman's such a boring superhero, whatever. It's just he just beats stuff up and he's all kind of like, I'm very brave. But when he started off, he was designed, I guess, to be a socialist, right? He went up against corrupt miners. He went and sat in court and dealt with people that were like women that were abused by their husbands. Kids that have been failed by the system and were like in court. He would go there and go like it's not his fault he's in this situation, and he'd get put away by the corrupt law services. And Superman would go and break them the fuck out and like take them somewhere they could live a normal life. Yeah.
I mean, that sounds infinitely more interesting. Like, I would.
This is what these are comics that I had to dig out when I was at school. You know, the internet really. Then
I think I would really enjoy Henry Cavill playing that Superman, as opposed to the Superman that the kind of the Man of Steel-esque Superman. But that's just because I really like Henry Cavill. So
go against corrupt governors, all sorts of stuff, and he wasn't. He didn't go around just like beating up robot. There was a robot in sight, or a.
But he was still he was still an alien essentially.
Yeah.
He was still like he still had the same superhero backstory. He was just a superhero that actually really cared about regular
but he
people.
wasn't as super as he turned out later. His powers just kind of they tacked on a new thing whenever it suited the story.
Well, yeah, because he gets his powers from Earth's yellow sun.
Yeah, but he couldn't fly.
No, he could jump though.
It was leap as tall as a tall building.
But they kept building those buildings taller and taller, and he's like, it's getting too big. I'm going to have to start flying.
No, he had to start flying when he had to fly around the world so fucking fast that time went backwards because of Lois Lane was so wet. Like there was just I just can't.
Dear listener, feel the love we have for Superman here.
I love the concept of Superman. I love the backstory. I love the whole kind of I love that whole outsider perspective. It's very Hercules. Like it's very it's very like child of the gods. It's got like Grecian origins. It's got mythological.
He's an alien. He's unfairly treated. He's persecuted.
Yeah,
he's fleeing his homeland because it's being invaded.
And the biggest thing about comic books, again, like harking straight back to the beginning, is that they are a medium to discuss the status of outsiders and how those outsiders become integrated into society in whatever way, whether it's by saving it or damning it. And it's the same. You can trace that back even further. You can trace that back again to Mary Shelley. You can trace it back to the Brontes if you really wanted to think about it in a literary context. And ultimately, I don't care what anybody else says, like graphic novels and comic books are literary. They're inherently literary because they contain so many of those really important classical tropes.
Just to double down what you're saying there as well. I mean, the fact they had to give Superman an alter ego, and then everyone else has an alter ego. Particularly people like Superman, though, who is like an alien, and he's not allowed to be Superman. He's only allowed to be Clark Kent, who's super nebbishy, right? And just there. But so he's the ultimate socialist hero when I was reading about him at school. Yeah, and I thought he was really cool, like the origins of him. I found him quite dull when, my friend was wearing a black armband because he was dead, and you're like, "What are you doing?" They've managed to kill off someone that so many people hated. It's like later on with Batman, isn't it? When they kill Jason Todd, and they had that writing, writing what you want to happen to Jason Todd. Kill him.
That was well, I can't.
But he was so popular. Superman was popular, and he was when I was at school. And he was so back then when he came out. He was selling over 1 million copies of the Superman magazine. And
Because he was unique.
Yeah,
at
but
that point.
Siegel and Shuster sold the rights to it because they couldn't find any way to sell it. But the guys that bought it kept them on as like the main writer and the main artist. But you've got to imagine that not only was he, but then loads of other stuff came out pretty quickly. But the kids back then were passing on that comic 10 times at least. Was the so like that's 10 million children and young adults or whatever reading Superman. That's incredible, right?
It is incredible. And I mean, it absolutely shows you the power that it has as a medium. Because speaking of, my mother and my sister are a psychic night right now, which I find quite amusing.
Marvelous. Just gonna throw
Do
that
they
in.
know what you're doing?
What?
This message is going like,
surely they should do.
We're at a medium, like we know what you're doing. We know what you're talking about.
No. I remembered that because I said the word medium, and I knew that they're at the local pub with a medium.
Are they now? Is it really about the medium?
My sister really wants to go. My mum is accompanying my sister.
Is the medium actually a glass of wine?
The medium may well be a glass of wine. But no, like it's incredibly it is incredibly powerful, right? And even if you look at sort of, like some of the more kind of vigilante style superheroes, like and vigilantes, I suppose, from like the earlier history of comics, they do kind of have that very solid foundation of like, this is like there's socialism, but also there's very little there's very little in there that's morally grey. And then you kind of, as you start kind of moving towards now, things
everything's grey.
If you look at things like Watchmen, like none of those characters are good. None of those people are doing good things. Oh no, we're not talking about the boys. The boys.
Oh yeah, you've started watching it, haven't you?
Oh.
So like in when you talk about Miller and oh my god, Moore, right, doing the Watchmen and let's say Dark Knight Returns, Alan Moore is very much about saying like, we don't fucking need fascist superheroes trying to save, like being out there doing stuff. Look what a bunch of arseholes they are. I'm going to tear apart a bunch of these characters we've dredged up and turned into and you got Frank Miller at the same time writing stories, which I love both of these comics when I was growing up, but you got Frank Miller writing stories about how Batman has been tamed by liberal lefties who and that he's broken him, and there's a psychologist who's fixed the Joker, and it all goes terrible. We need Batman back to bat the crap out of people, and that's
bat the crap out of people.
Yeah, he does
with his bat crap.
But he only ever renders unconscious. He never kills, at least in the video games.
I discovered the other day that Alfred was ditched out of Batman until the 60s. Do you know why he came back?
What? Because everyone loved him, and he's the best character, obviously.
Because they put him in and they put him in that, and so he came back because he was in
because
that.
Of the anime.
No, because of the old Adam West Batman.
Oh.
Because they stuck him in that as this camp butler, and everyone loved him, so they put him back in the comics.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
I didn't know that either. I wasn't even doing any research; it just kind of came up in a YouTube video I was watching. I went, "Oh,
very cool.
That's interesting." But yeah, it was very kind of you don't that writing that you're talking about there, Beans. You don't get until the 80s. You don't get until the British invasion happened, and where we all grew up. Well, Mark and I spent a lot of time reading comics like 2000 AD and that kind of thing. When that was happening, all these new writers that had grown up in the 60s suddenly had this whole big kind of fucking authority. The wars had just happened. And everything else, we went and punked at the Americans. They didn't like it.
Holly is currently struggling with a cat.
The cat fell down. And the cat fell down and grabbed me instead of the chair.
Well, I've got a better story because today, while I was upstairs, just doing a bit of exercise, my cat brought in a squirrel and dumped it in the front room behind some chairs.
It was alive.
It was not a happy squirrel. It was very angry. Did not want to be in my front room, but he had no idea how to get out.
I wonder if it was the same squirrel as last time.
No, I don't think it was. It was quite small, but angry. It made a lot of noises and it leapt around a lot. like a lot. Anyway, but yeah, so we're in the 1940s. We're talking about like how so Superman for me it was very important in this work I was doing when I was at school, this project, because he was such a socialist hero, and I loved him, and he was great, and I couldn't understand why he'd become this knob end. That you're quite right. Who had these really weird kind of story necessary powers, that he'd picked up and lost.
No, but
I've lost some, I've gained some, I've eaten some red kryptonite. It's all gone a bit weird.
But it's the same as Adam West's bat belt, right? There was always whatever he needed was always like bat shark
plot convenient belt.
Yeah, a really important part of comic books, and I know with Superman it's really dull because like Superman's always going to save the day, and that's why Injustice, that whole storyline and the whole storyline of the Earth 2 and all of that nonsense is really cool because it makes Superman into actually just a bit of a dick, and that's quite fun to watch.
I think Mark and I are going to talk later because we would discuss this last week about how that broke, like DC just broke everything and had to make 50 different universes to try and make it work again.
Yeah, exactly. But like having those, ultimately it's all there is a lot of expectation that you will just suspend your disbelief and let them do what they need to do to be able to.
To be fair to Adam West, they made that really campy,
They did, yeah, absolutely. And once it became a trope, it was really funny. I think the problem with Superman has always been that Superman takes itself very seriously as an entity.
Do you think that came out of the whole idea of socialism at the beginning? They were trying to make this whole kind of like point. What they were trying to extol their beliefs through Superman. They made him far too serious in that regard, and then gave him loads of superpowers.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, now that I understand the socialism thing, it's actually much more clear why he does, like, why Superman as an entity does take itself so seriously, and it's because it was like it was basically a value proposition, right? It was a value proposition for socialism, whereas
wish fulfillment for the writers and the readers.
Yeah. Whereas if you look at something like like the Beano or the Dandy or Asterix, or even like Batman, as far as I'm concerned, it's a story that can be told serially and is fun.
Yeah.
Like if the intention was there to make Batman, a Democrat or something, then I'm sure that it would have been much more kind of obvious and much more painted throughout.
And you're right. And Superman, was very. We're going to touch in probably in the next episode now, but like, on like where Captain America comes from, right, in the Second World War and stuff, because he's like you're talking about Superman being a bland and boring character, yeah.
Yeah.
Not that much fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like Christopher Reeve, I think, did a fantastic job in the Superman film, the first one at least, of making a good effort of him being on screen. I think he was quite a cool.
Yeah, I mean, you believed a man could fly.
Yeah.
And that film was also because of its special effects technology breakthrough there, that it at least looked convincing for special effects for flight. Whereas previously people had just leapt out windows or
up and away.
Yeah. Or they were filmed vertically with a fan blowing down on somebody wafting their cape out of the screen.
But now there's a lot of relevance towards another really boring character in Captain America, because if you look at him, he's basically
also boring.
But he was really good in the MCU. They made a really good fist of taking this kind of like 1940s values character, who just bashes stuff and turning him into a good TV project.
But you were able to do that, I think, because they had the capacity to give him a huge arc over not that much time.
Yeah, but DC aren't doing that well with Superman, are they?
Well, no, they're absolutely not.
DC are screwing their whole cinematic universe.
I have one word for you that ruined DC cinema for me, possibly forever, and that word is Martha. Which is the name of both Batman and Superman's mothers. And at one point where Batman is trying to kill Superman yells out Martha, which is a really fucking weird thing for him to like yell out anyway. And then Batman's like, huh? My mum's name was Martha too. Let's be friends.
That's because Batman's joking him, so he's having flashbacks.
But I did quite like the fact that they were basically playing The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, they were. There was very Frank Miller. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so when we're going to kind of wrap up in a minute, and we're talking about going into the 40s because like you had 1939, Batman turns up, like Holly, for your benefit, that's when he appears.
Cool.
A bit later than Superman, and I think for Marvel you had Namor and the Human Torch because they had a big thing going on. If you read those old bits of Fantastic Four flashback.
Yeah, well, I mean that was the android Human Torch.
Yeah,
it
was exciting. It was just big red blur of light on the page. Very cool. Loads of lesson names. Then in the 1940s, you get like Jay Garrick's Flash and Hawkman. One of my favourites, who is called Ferret, who I have to mention, even though he's like a completely useless guy, because it was a comic about a detective with a pet ferret, and that's just glorious. You can't. I mean, if you're gonna,
I love that.
Yeah,
what's that ferret? Two small boys trapped down a well. The water's rising.
You've read it, or did you write it?
Yeah, no, I read it. That's one of my favourites.
But yeah, I mean, like you've got like Owlman and Dick Grayson appears as Robin, and there's Catwoman. There's loads of stuff happening, and somebody just pitched this detective with a ferret, and they were like, "Yeah, do that as well." Throw that in there, and I was really happy because that's when I was a kid. I don't know if it was the same for anyone else, but if I went away with my parents, you go into a shop, there'd be if you like any kind of like antique shop, there would just be an area of piles of comics from the 1930s up to whenever I was 80s and stuff, and I found these like ferret comics and all manner of things, which are still in my loft, and got to read really stupid crap. But it was great. It was amazing. I loved it. It was really good.
I stayed with my grandparents. Like the only similarity that I have to that at all is that I stayed with when I used to stay with my grandparents, like my biological dad's parents, when I used to stay with them at like half terms and stuff, like a lot of the stuff that my dad had while he was living there, they just had kept, and it was in the bedroom that I slept in. And he had like a Calvin and Hobbes anthology. That was basically like that was like my whole, and I had
so good.
No idea what the fuck it was or what the fuck was going on. I remember that like on the front cover, like which one's Calvin and which one's Hobbes?
Hobbes is the tiger.
Hobbes is the tiger. Right? Hobbes was like
I'm miming tiger. I don't know what I'm doing. If listeners, I was miming. I knew it as well.
Hobbes was like peeing on something, and I found that absolutely hysterically funny. And yeah, that's kind of the only. And then they used to buy me the Beano and the Dandy every time I used to go and stay with them.
Those things of finding a comic book and a comic book character just out of nowhere, without any research into it, without being introduced to it by anybody else, you just stumble across something. Whether it's your parents or your grandparents or friends. I think those moments where it's like discovering music for yourself, that you're not listening, it's not stuff you're hearing on the radio, but it's something you find. For me, I thought one of my really early ones was Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth, drawn by Jack Kirby. It's a DC thing. It's basically post-apocalyptic, and Commandy is the last boy, and all the other creatures in the world are basically animals, humanoid animals, and they've all evolved into this post-apocalyptic world. And I just came across that and went, wow, this is batshit crazy, but it's great. And of course, Jack Kirby, another Jewish legend of comic books, his artwork just made everything great.
It is weird when you pick up a comic book for the first time, as you exactly described it, and find that your identity has been printed onto a page by someone else and drawn there, and you're like, this is me. This is how I think.
Well, I didn't actually identify with Commandy because he just walks around in like ragged jeans. No, I didn't. Honestly, I didn't.
But you could have written it. That's my point. That's your identity. Is like the kind of the things that you're into, the things you enjoy, and you're reading it and going, this is all about like this appeals to me. This is who I am. This is grand. Returning to our end of pod, because it is the end of our pod. I know, sad. That went by really quickly.
It did.
We're about to kind of wander into the Second World War period, and we're talking about Captain America turning up, and how Superman actually turns into a bit of it's less kind of wholesome, and turns really quickly into slap a Jap Superman.
Oh no.
That's printed across all the comics.
Oh, for fuck's sake, stupid.
Well,
what's wrong with people?
We talked about how Captain America was literally created to punch Hitler in the face. And,
well, I mean, that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. But I'm not advocating anything.
I'm advocating punching Hitler in the face.
Okay, I am also advocating that. But you know what I mean about stuffing the Jap and stuff.
Of course, no. That's
it's just
wrong
how
on every single
again,
human level.
Politics sort of turns things around. And Captain America was created as Jack Kirby and Joe Simon's effort to get America into the war before Pearl Harbor. But we'll talk about that next time, I guess. And
Ooh,
exciting!
Kind of,
all those kind of things. Because everyone back then was Antifa. It wasn't just us good guys.
Mm.
There we go. So yeah, that's us, beautiful people. We managed to get our pod in record time, in actual sort of like, oh no, we might not have done. Holly's got to tell us something interesting about Cotton and the sideways scrolling game Hercules.
1997's side-scrolling Hercules. I actually just wanted to give a very quick shout out to Lee from Molinarius Games.
I was going to the outro bit.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry I ruined it, but he actually sent me a YouTube video of somebody playing through the entirety of the 1997's side-scrolling Disney Hercules game and completing it. So I've now seen levels that I've never seen before, but I can also tell you that I do the first level better than that guy because he missed the flame sword that was hiding behind the tree.
You've done it so many times.
Fuck yes.
Okay, so we've run over now.
I'm not sorry at all.
No, we've run over already. We're already kind of like beyond the part, but we had a plan. We have fulfilled the plan quite well. So yeah, I think that's us, beautiful people. Our talking about comics begun. We've got more to talk about. I know that we're going to talk about like the comic book code coming in, underground comics, because Mark's got tons to say about it. And I really want to like kind of pick his brains about artwork and bits and pieces throughout the generations. Like, why was it like that for ages in comics they would have the outline of someone, but the ink would seem to miss the person and be kind of printed half in the boundaries of the person that they were and half outside of it.
It's just cheap printing.
Just cheap printing.
Just banging them out.
Okay.
That's something I'd love to talk about, the whole evolution. Not banging it out like Holly said.
Okay, so the same wasn't ink. So we're trying to tell me. There you go, gentle listeners. We have learned from Mark that it was in fact not ink that was on the page.
It's banging out a Batman.
But yes. So there. I was going to say like we got off to a flying start and we didn't say anything disgusting, but we've ruined that now by indicating that in fact the comics just come.
I feel it's at least one of our duties to let the side down on every episode.
We'll be back next week, talking more about comics and our experience with them. Goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Same bat time, same bat channel.
The power of the price. Goodbye. Much love, everyone. Take care of each other. Have an amazing week.
Bat bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to A Geek Tragedy with me, Plague Mantle, and my best friend, the excellent Holly Properly, and our actually famous guy, Mark Cordery. If you like this, there is plenty more at patreon.com/A Geek Tragedy. Production is by Kit Britnell. Our logo and artwork is by markcordery.com. Music is by Borislaw Kozielski. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Geek Tragedy. Email us at ageektragedypodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget to tell all your geeky friends. Also, a big shout out to all of our genius geeks. We adore each and every one of you. And of course, much love. Take care of each other.